Hello again and welcome to the deck. So I've finished up my section from my last video, and it took a little bit of engineering to sort of make it work. I had to play around with the placement of the paper. I used some paper clips and stuff so that I could see where would it have to be glued so it would still open up. So I glued one side and then closed up the book completely. Then I glued the other tab, close it up, and let it glue naturally in the book. That way I know when the pages are closed, it's going to fold in there nicely, and when I open it up, it's going to pop out correctly. So it is going to take a little bit of practice. Each person's would be different if you decide to do that. I also like that you can see behind the image and see some of the news articles that are underneath. So it's not completely covering everything. The other thing I mentioned in the last video was that I wanted to put in this article over top of the toilet paper that's talking about how people are kind of going crazy buying toilet paper. I thought about gluing it flat in, but that does kind of cover up some of my pages. And then I realized that the spine of my book is open because it's an older book. The spine was kind of weak. So I ran string through that, and I used a hacksaw blade that I found in my garage, put a little string through there, and then I could push it through the spine of the book just like that to go all the way through and pull the string to the other side. So that became a nice little tool I hadn't expected. And this way, I just put a little bit of hot glue behind it so it won't slide around too much, but you can still see the stuff that's underneath it. It's not hiding all of my previous work. So that's a different way to kind of do it, and that was just through experimentation. And that's what you're gonna have to do is experiment, because none of this is going to be simple or the usual thing. You know, you can't just go to a store and say, hey, I want an altered book. You need to kind of work through it. As I was exploring my book, I found that I had this front section that I hadn't really addressed, and it includes China in it. And we have some writing and prologue, and I like the idea that this is at the beginning of the book. So I'm kind of reflecting back to the beginnings of this, and we know that the virus started in Wuhan, China, in a meat market, they think. And so I want to kind of address that in here. I circled or boxed in some words, kind of like I did in the Blackout poem, and I'm going to use that to kind of make a statement over here. And I'm going to use some whiteout so I can block out some things that I don't want here, and maybe I could write in later. So I'm going to start off with a little watercolor. I'm going to start on this side to just give it a color. And I've got 3 little containers of water, just some junk containers with some water in it. So it won't be too hard to clean up. You don't need anything fancy. And I think on this side, I'm gonna use my greens. And I'm just gonna kind of add some color in here so it's not just a white page. So I've got my greens. I'm gonna go ahead and throw in some blues, just to give it a little bit of color. Now, if you remember earlier in this process, I did this other page, and I think I'm going to shred this up into lines and then use that to do my frame around this artwork that I'm creating today. So it's not going to be thrown away. I told you you'd use it at some point. I'm going to be using it now, but it's up to you when you want to use that kind of stuff. So I'm almost done here. Just give it a little bit more color. And while I work on the other side, I'm going to let this sort of dry because I'm going to put some white acrylic on top of it. All right, so going back over here, I wanted to play around with the idea of highlighting China. And I'm going to use some red and just some watercolor red and highlight the country here. And then I think I'm going to highlight some of this other countries here. I'll use different colors, kind of like how you might see on a world map. So do Thailand maybe in blue. I don't have a particular reason for this color. I suppose I could look up the color of the flag and use a dominant color from Thailand's flag, but I'm just gonna do it this way for now. Cambodia, Since I've got two primaries, I'm just going to go with another primary. Use a different yellow so it's not matching my other page. Maybe I can have a little contrast. Throw in a little bit of yellow there. Just to kind of make it pop. Not being really fussy about this. Now as I think about it, this is going to be water. So maybe I don't really want that to be blue. But because it's blue, it's a primary color. So I could add yellow to it, or I'm just going to put some green on top of it. And that's going to change it real quick. There we go. So to use primaries, it's very easy to kind of change the color as you see there. And now I'm going to go ahead and put some blue in the water. And let's see. Get some blue out here. A little bit more intense maybe. And when you do wet on wet, it makes things blend really easily. Not worried about the frame because again, I'm going to cut this into strips and use that as a frame. Now I want to show that the virus is coming from China. So I'm going to play around with some acrylic paint now. And I'm going to let it get a little drippy. So to do that, I'm going to take this box, put it here. I'm going to lean my book. And then I'm going to go ahead and I think I'm going to use green. If I use red, then it's about blood, and this isn't about war. This is about a virus. So for whatever reason, green sort of makes me think of virus. Certainly in cartoons and things like that, we see that kind of idea. So I'm going to go ahead and use my big brush to thin out my green. And I'm working on just a big pad of newspaper, so I can just throw this away when I'm done. I can also just paint this up and then use this later on. You've noticed that I've covered my table with a piece of plastic. I just took a garbage bag and opened it up. All right, and I get my thin brush, and I want this to be really watery so that it'll drip, and I've got to get some more water in here. All right, let's see if we can do this. I'm going to go ahead and put it just on the edge. And to make it drip, I'm probably going to have to add a little bit more. A little bit more. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just add water to this. Let it drip. And if I want to intensify it, I can go ahead and start adding some more of my green to the edge and let it drip some more. All right, I feel like I want a little bit more in here. A little bit more there. All right, so that kind of has the effect that I want. I think I may make China a little brighter red when that dries, just so it really pops. So that's going to be enough drip. And I'm going to go back and play with some white. So this is dry enough that I can start adding white acrylic. And I'll be using this as sort of my whiteout. I'll get a little there, and I'm going to use my other containers. All right, I'm going to just add a little white water to it to activate it, and then I'm going to try and keep the words that I wanted to. It's okay if I have some little chunks in there. And I'm using the white to kind of first box around my words. So before we were blocking words, this time I'm kind of whiting out words for a different sort of effect. Okay, so I've got my words sort of planned out. I'm just going to kind of fill in with my whiteout. Oh, so we left school on a Friday, so I'm going to leave the Friday there. This isn't really about Thailand, so I'm going to go ahead and wipe this out. And I'm just going to kind of clean up the edges a bit. I'm okay if some of the words are not completely whited out. I'd like to have some evidence of what was originally there. This is more artistic than anything else. I'm going to go ahead and white some out up here. And if I want to later on, I could write a little bit in these whiteout spaces. I don't know if I am or not yet, but I'm kind of playing with that idea. All right, so I've got mostly what I wanted to get done with this done, and it needs to kind of remain to dry. I could certainly play with a little bit more whiteout to kind of even out the tone. And then I did want to have some red in China, so I'm going to pull some of this. It's kind of a red-orange color, which will work for me. Go ahead and clean out my brush. I don't want it to be too wet. Yeah, this is looking more orange. That's fine. Maybe I'll mix in a little white in that. And then I can go around the edge of China again. Okay, and I like this dry brush technique. I don't want to hide the word China because it's integral to what's going on here, you know, in the early stages, but now it's a worldwide thing. So what I'm going to do next is I'll be cutting strips of this to create a frame to go around my artwork, and I might be writing a little bit on top of this whiteout. I might leave it, I'm still got to play around with that idea, but I will certainly share it with you in the next video. All right, thank you very much. Make sure you clean up all of your stuff. When you're using paint, don't put it down a sink when there's dishes and things around, because some paints, well, most paints are non-toxic that you'll probably get a hold of. There are some that are kind of toxic. So if you have a junk sink, or a sink in the garage, or you can even use a hose outside, maybe into a ditch. You want to watch where that water is going. You don't want it to go end up in a lake or something. But you know, be careful about where it is that you're cleaning your stuff. Don't make your mom angry by getting paint on her good dishes or something like that. But keep those things in mind as you go ahead and clean up your area. All right, we'll talk to you again soon.